Hey, family. Once again, here we are doing what it is that we feel led and called to do vocationally. I like using religious language, and since I am a religious person, I can use religious language. Anyway, welcome to this platform we call Relevant Conversations with me, Bishop John Selditz. And tonight, what I feel very blessed and honored that I get the opportunity to talk to some of the smartest, brightest, most interestingest folk in all of the world, all across the world. And a number of years ago, after hearing about this interesting story, which we're going to spend the next little bit of time here talking about, I got to meet this person who is our guest, who has this enormous task of representing the legacy of her ancestor. And I'm not going to steal her thunder. I'm going to let her talk to you as well. I am pleased and godly proud to be connected and related. We're going to figure out how I'm in this family too. But certainly we're godly proud and pleased to have her for the first time on this our platform. Let me introduce to you Her Royal Highness Karen Chapman. Come on and greet our friends and family.
Hello, how are you doing? You were doing a wonderful job, actually, introducing me. You made me bigger than life, but yes. How are you doing this afternoon, Dr. Selders?
I'm doing very well. Listen, we're not gonna take a whole. We're gonna jump right into this thing. Let me first do just a little bit of storytelling from the Hartford end of this story. Right, I came into the knowledge of Prince Abdulrahman, and you're going to talk much more about who he was and who what brought him to Hartford in the first place. We'll spend a little time there, but I came into the information because of some of the work I've been doing around Black folk in Hartford and in Connecticut. I have a research project that I am working with, kind of, in collaboration, in conjunction with folk at Trinity College. A number of you know that I have some role at Trinity College here in Hartford. And so I would be bopping along doing my work, and then we find out about something that happened almost 200 years ago. And we kept digging and you kept digging. And for those of you who do research, here's how this goes. You'll be looking for something and something else will pop up. And then you would go down the rabbit hole, and then what? There's another thing, and there's another thing, and all of a sudden, the original question and theory and theorizing you've now found receipts on a whole nother level. And you ultimately, I call them receipts because, in fact, there's what we do know is that there's some paper somewhere. Somebody wrote something down. Somebody made some reference to some things. And that's, in fact, how we found you, Princess Karen, and in fact, found your ancestors. So I'm going to pause just for a moment to say, how we doing?
We're doing great. And as you said before, you can go from one thing and unearth a whole bunch of other things, right? So I grew up in Natchez, Mississippi. And for those who don't know the story of Prince Abdulrahman, he was a Moorish and Fulani prince. And to break that down, he had Moorish, which came from Morocco bloodline, as well as Fulani that came from the Fouta Djallon region, which is now Guinea. He was a son of a king. His father was Ibrahima Sori, and he was in the country of Fouta Djallon, which is now present-day Guinea and Tembo, and he was captured not by the slave traders per se, but by rival, tribe. and they sold him to the slave ships. He ended up in Natchez, Mississippi, after first going to the Dominican and then to New Orleans, and he was finally sold and bought by a gentleman named Thomas Foster. I was born in Natchez, Mississippi. It was the second largest slave town in the United States. Um, and so it's also famous for Richard Wright, the who wrote Black Boy, and also Native Son, who is my mother's um, uncle, half uncle. They share a shared relative, and it's also the town where most people know Medgar Eggers, right? So it is a famous town in itself. But Prince Abdulrahman actually brought something different to Natchez and different to the Black community and the United States when they could actually historically verify that he was a African royal and that they had a dynasty. And so we hear so many cliches like, oh, the African prince, the Nigerian prince, and it became like a folklore and a sense of humor and the butt of a lot of comedian jokes. But this prince actually suffered quite a bit, and he struggled for 40 years in captivity until he was emancipated. And that story in itself took on its own element because there was diplomatic and kingdoms involved to get his freedom.
So let's go back just for a second, because there's a bunch of intrigue in just what you just set up. What you just set up. First off, for him to arrive in Natchez, Mississippi, the journey it took through the Middle Passage or the Meafa, he goes to the what we now call the Dominican Republic, yes. And then he's bought and sold to New Orleans. And then, just in case those of you don't know your geography, New Orleans is at the very end of the Mississippi River, and so he and those enslaved Africans went up the Mississippi River and were ported off in all the towns along the way. That's why today Mississippi has the one of the largest populations of African Americans, because there were a bunch of enslaved Africans who worked those plantations in Mississippi. That's a topic for a different day. But he worked there with the Foster family. In fact, to the point that he was the guy in charge. He was running Massa's business, because in fact, Prince Sori was a leader. He had command over men and women. And so his leadership brought him into distinction, serving Mr. Foster, Colonel Foster. I think he was a colonel during the one of the wars. And this is the intriguing part of this story for me. He was in town doing his business, and he was seen by a physician who had come to Timbo, where the family and the family was in Africa, and had gotten injured, took ill, and it was the family there that took care of him, and he recognized him from a distance in Natchez, Mississippi, of all places. And that's where the connection came, that his family nursed me to health. So we need to get him out of here, because he shouldn't be here. If anybody, I owe him a debt, because it was this family, his family, that saved me. And in fact, talk a little bit about that part of the story.
Yeah, so that's really a quite interesting story. So, like you had said, Dr. Selders, Dr. John Cox was a physician that was on was on a ship, for a supply ship. It wasn't actually a slave ship, and it was in Africa. And he was out on patrol, because they had relationships with these African nations, and he was out with one of the other crew, and he got sick, and then he was being nursed during that time. And then it was like, okay, I'm too sick to get back on the ship and I need help. And so Ibrahim Sori, which was Prince Abdulrahman's father, said, bring him here. And, there weren't a lot of white men in the regions, so they nursed him back to health. And in that home was Prince Abdulrahman. And he was 17 years of age when Dr. Cox first met him. So fast forward now, almost 40 years later, it was 30 years to be exact, he comes across this young African male, and he doesn't notice him at first. Actually, it was Prince Abdulrahman that noticed him. And he said, I think I know that man. So he was with one of his subjects that he had become enslaved with him, named Samba. And he said, can you please go and see if that gentleman has a patch over his eye? And the Samba came back and reported, yes, he does. And he realized at this time, this was the same man that his father had nursed back to health. When he went to greet him, all of a sudden, Dr. Cox recognized him as well and reached out and hugged him. And he pushed him off because other, white people were around. And he says, no, I'm not a prince anymore. I'm a slave. And so that's kind of how his journey started and his journey to freedom.
I love that part of the story. This story has huge import.
Oh, and might I add, Dr. Selders, that Dr. John Cox was an Irishman. So they had met over on a whole different continent in Africa. There was no reason for this white man to be in Natchez, Mississippi, of all places, but he had set up and decided that Natchez was so profitable because at one point, Natchez was the richest town in the world, not in the country, but the world, because of the tobacco, sugarcane, and cotton.
And King Cotton.
Yes, King
and
Cotton.
Of course, those of our ancestors, yours and mine directly. For those of you who don't know, my mother is from Mississippi. So all of my mother's people come from just a little bit away from Natchez, Mississippi. In fact, well, it's across the way a little bit, but it's in that region of Mississippi, a town called Waynesboro in Wayne County, Mississippi. So I have roots in that part of the United States as well. Now, so here we go.
I like to add that I don't think a lot of people really understand. So to have slaves back in that period, you had to be well off. Not every white person in America had a slave. This is just a fallacy that most people believe. There were plenty poor white people that could not afford slaves, right? So in Natchez, Mississippi, in Adams County, because actually Prince Abdulrahman was kept outside of Natchez in the county, which is now Washington. But Natchez was the big booming town at that time. Most people in Natchez, Mississippi, we can trace our ancestry up to the 8th generation because we came straight from Africa to Natchez, and most of us didn't leave. Also, there's a high probability that most people in Natchez are biologically related because of the small amount of white people that owned slaves, and they did interbreeding.
So there you have it. That's why Princess Karen and I said we might be related because
the nose knows.
The nose knows. That's exactly right. So here we are. Now we pick up this story. What happened with Dr. Cox's recognition ultimately caused for the United States government to get involved with correspondence, which we now have the receipts, these documents, these letters that were passed from one kingdom, from one country to the other country to verify that Prince Abdul's mother, to make sure I got this right, his mother had ancestry in Morocco. Is that correct?
Yes. So the way that it has been told and has been told through the generations is that Prince Abdulrahman was a Moor. And he was a Moor because, so geographically, so the Moroccans came into Mali and kind of did a sort of like colonialism, right? They colonized Timbuktu, the Mali region, right? And so his mother, and back in the day, if you were from a royal family, right, you're gonna marry off into another royal family for peace. And this is
Mhm.
what happened. So his mother had that Moorish bloodline. They even talked about when he first came to Natchez how he had this long, beautiful, wavy hair, and how the master made Thomas Foster made him cut his hair because he wanted to, you know, this was a punishment sort of way. You're going to cut that hair. You're going to blend in like everyone else because his hair was different. And his complexion was lighter. Of course, in the
Mhm.
sun, he got dark and they depleted him like that, right? But yes, and that's where that nobility came in, which he used in his favor, especially since he was an educated man, spoke 5 languages, and was fluent in Arabic. Because in Timbuktu, that is the language, or was the language of that region.
Mhm.
And so he was able to not only write, speak in Arabic, but he was reading and writing. And there was a newspaper man called Andrew Marchok, and he ran the local paper. He had Abdulrahman write in Arabic, and it was forwarded to Henry Clay, the Secretary of State, which actually took it to John Quincy Adams, the president, who then sent a message over to Morocco saying, hey, we think we have one of your people. They vetted him and say, yes, he's ours. You need to let him free.
Mhm. See how this works, you all? This was 200 years ago. 200 years ago, this happened. 1827, 28, right? 28.
Yes, it was in 1827 they got the ball rolling. Mhm.
So it took,
It was
it
a
took,
little bit before that because it took 10 years. So it was like
mhm.
2000, it was 18, it was in 18, I want to get my years right, but it was in the 18, like 20, 1818. It was in 1818.
1818.
It took him 10 other years after they realized he was actually a prince. It took them 10 years still to gain his freedom. Because
All
what
right.
Thomas Foster said was, okay, I'll let him go. However, somebody got to pay me. And so that's when the president of the United States says, have him come to see me at the White House. And he gave, and it's on the books, um, where John Quincy Adams actually gave money for Prince Abdul Rahman's freedom and that of his wife Isabella.
All right. So now, and check this, y'all. Check this. This is when now the story gets hot. Because of the discovery of Prince Sori and this relationship, now people wanted to get on the bandwagon, right? So
Yeah.
the other folk wanted to get in on this, right? And at the same time, and in fact, around the same time of his initial contact and discovery, in that period of time, there was a organization called the American Colonization Society. Some of you all may have heard of it. That got started and founded. Their founder said, "Listen, we need to do the best we can to purchase the freedom of other Africans who have been enslaved." And wouldn't it be a good idea? Wouldn't it be just as God would have it that we would purchase these formerly enslaved folk, we purchase their freedom and then send them back to Africa? Isn't that just the way God would have it? And if we convince enough folk to do that, we can get rid of all of these Africans. Mhm. And you know, the altruism in that, we're suspicious of it today.
Mhm.
But that was the thinking. And so the American Colonization Society got started. We now know it was the beginnings of the American Colonization Society that ultimately led to the establishing of the country of Liberia, which are the leadership of Liberia are those ancestors today of those formerly enslaved Africans who were here in America, who were repatriated. It didn't even matter what tribe they were from. They didn't necessarily have to be there, but Liberia is on the west coast of Africa. We now know that the enslavement period was all over Africa, Southern Africa, Western Africa, and East Africa. So, as we have done, some of us have done our DNA, and gotten that DNA test, we now know we have ancestry, that's all over Africa and have connections to multiple places. But the largest number of those who were enslaved here in the United States make their home is West Africa and Southern Africa. And here's another interesting fact that we don't talk a lot about. Many of us, our sojourn was through South America. In fact, the Portuguese were the first who were involved in the enslaving of Africans for the purposes of making money. Let's just be very clear. And this whole idea of plantation work, freed labor, the Portuguese popularized that. And so they brought a lot of Black folk, Africans, through the Mayalpha, through the Middle Passage to South America. And it was from South America into the Caribbeans and the Caribbeans into North America. So those stories we need to tell more of. The reason I really appreciate your story, and let's talk more about how this ultimately came to national prominence. Now, Prince Sori went to Washington, D.C., got money from the president, and then others got on the bandwagon, right?
Yes. So the interesting part to that was after Prince Abdulrahman obtained emancipation for him and his wife, then he was Thomas Gallaudet, the founder of American Sign Language, reached out, and he had started like you said, the ACS Auxiliary, which was in Connecticut. I mean, it wasn't fully the ACS, it was at the beginning stages, but he was like, this would be a good marketing to get other Black people to want to go to Liberia, and we can work with these white slave owners to try to, get their people back. And so, but it came with conditions, because as John Quincy Adams, which few people know, never had slaves. He never owned slaves. And so Andrew Jackson had beat him out of the election. While John Quincy Adams was still in office, then guess what? He had a little protection. But once Andrew Jackson, so Thomas Foster wrote a letter to Andrew Jackson and said, I want that slave, he probably wasn't that nice, sent back to Africa, because if he doesn't, I'm going to re-enslave him and his wife. He was trying to raise money through with the help of Thomas Gallaudet and Center Church, right, on this tour up through the Northeast to raise money for his 9 children left in bondage or in captivity, enslavement in Natchez, Mississippi, which I am part of that legacy, right?
Right.
And so he ended up having to leave without his 9 children. And so in 1829, he boarded a ship, right, back to Africa, to Liberia, where they were sending all the slaves, and with every intent to make the journey back over to Timbo. But unfortunately,
hang on. Let's hold up.
I hold that story.
So here we are. Now, Thomas Gallaudet, again, as Princess Karen just informed us, he's the dude from the School of the Deaf, the whole signing and all that kind of stuff. He both started a school here in Hartford, Connecticut. Yeah. And then ultimately, Washington, D.C., he and his son, his son actually went to Trinity College. So some of the stuff, the receipts we got because these folk were in relationship with one another, right? So Center Church, which is the congregational church here in Hartford, the first church. For those of you who are not in New England, this is how it goes. In order for a town to become a town, it had to have a couple of things, one of which is a congregational church in that town. All right, before they could even be a town. So if you come to New England, most towns around the town green, which is the downtown of any particular city or town. There's at least a congregational church, and an Episcopal church, and then later on a Catholic church, in and around, in proximity to those towns, as well as those churches had the more prominent members of said town. Thomas Gallaudet was a member of Center Church. All right, he wasn't a pastor there; he was a clergy person, but he was a prominent member. And Thomas Gallaudet also, and his story is a fascinating, interesting story. He was born in Philadelphia. So he had roots in Philadelphia. His family was a prominent family in Philadelphia. And then they moved to Connecticut and to Hartford in particular. But he still had connections both in Philly and in New York City. Now, again, let me give you the time frame. We're now talking 1828, 1827, 28. Now, Prince Sori, along with several others, are traveling around the country. They came to the East Coast. We now have documents that say that Prince Sori was in New York several times. He's in Philadelphia. He's in Washington, D.C. He came to Hartford a couple of times. We think it was probably the same trip, but you know, we're trying to figure that all out. But that he came here, then he went to Boston, then maybe possibly came back here, went down to New York City, and then maybe came back here again. There were several events. We have some receipts on the event. In fact, Thomas Gallaudet wrote a book about Prince Sori's visit. And he documents for us, at least from his perspective, how he came to know of the story of the prince and his activity, in fact, with relationship to Prince Sori. They were very proud of their connection to Prince Sori. Now, here's another thing that makes this all possible. The one of the underlying reasons that the people who were involved in the American Colonization Society and the Connecticut Colonization Society. That's what you're talking about, the auxiliary. They in fact founded the Connecticut Colonization Society in conjunction with and in association with the national organization.
Yes, absolutely.
Right?
Correct.
They started that because what they wanted to do ultimately was to Christianize Africa.
Yes.
So these formerly enslaved Africans who are being emancipated, who are being freed, their freedom are being purchased by these benevolent folk. They really wanted to make sure that they were trained and Christian, and then they wanted to take them and have them go back to Africa as an evangelism tool. Are you all hearing me? All right. Now, what's funny about this whole thing, and Princess, you and I kikied about this, you know, because we understood that Prince Abdulrahman Ibrahima Ibn Sori was Muslim, and he was always going to be Muslim. And in fact, many enslaved Africans who made the journey to the Americas, they were actually Muslim. So one of the things I found very interesting that we have to understand that is shared amongst African Americans, one cultural value is that we know how, I'll say it this way, there is a dual consciousness between us. We understand that we got to do it one way because some group of people, y'all call it, what y'all call it?
Making it so we're making.
Well, that too, but we do a little code switching. That's what y'all call it. Y'all call it code switching. So we know how to be in the company of some folk. We can sing and dance and entertain on Sunday, while, you know, swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me on. Yeah, isn't that a great song? Ooh, that's such a great day to hear that harmony. And the white folk didn't know that black people were telling messages that maybe maybe the Underground Railroad and the engineer of the Underground Railroad was meeting. Follow the drinking gourd, right? These songs that were interesting songs and had religious connotations, but they also had embedded messages. Our tradition of quilting, which you also have had some connection with, also were this gathering of stuff, and embedded in the quilts themselves were hidden messages, right? So one of the things that people, I've just interestingly, I've heard a conversation that's stirring up about there is no African American culture, and you would be wrong to repeat that lie. We have embedded in who we are as Africans here in the Americas is this very fundamental idea that we can say one thing, represent one thing, understand one thing, having or say one thing, but it may have 3 or 4 meanings. If I'm wrong, then why is it that Michael Jackson could record a song, title the song and the album Bad, and bad means good? So we've been doing that. That's not something new. That's an old tradition, right? That within the context of African Americans, we've been doing that since you can't remember a time that we didn't have conversations in front of folk that meant something else.
Yeah. Well, I also wanted to take you back to a statement that you had said. So a lot of the Africans that came over were Muslim. And I know that, especially being in Natchez, because when I grew up as a little girl, I had 2 great aunts that were Muslim. And my mother used to say, well, they pray to the east. But I'm going to tell you how Black, that the Islamic culture fed into slavery. They couldn't totally get rid of some of the things. Some of the way that Black people worship today have a lot to do with Islam, because Christians weren't kneeling down on their knees like we did. They also, if you remember, if you were around my generation, late 50s, early 60s, before you used to go to bed in the country, you had to wash your feet. You had, before you prayed, you had to clean yourself. You couldn't just go to it, because that's ardu. That's the ardu that they do from Islam. When they pray to God, they need to be clean. This was carried over, especially into the Southern Baptists, the Black Southern Baptists. We carried a lot of those Islamic things. So, and especially in Natchez, Mississippi. So when I grew up, believe it or not, I don't want our audience to faint, but my mother always believed in praying to God, the higher power, right? We didn't, the Jesus, praying to Jesus concept came in a lot later for us because of the Islamic influence, right? So what I tell people, that Prince Sori's story not only touched on freedom, but it brought us to a place where we realized that religion played a key factor, especially among Black Americans. And I'm going to tell you, so many of us, and even me, it took years for me to have that awakening that we should be proud of our Blackness. We should be proud of our origins. Because when I grew up, as I told you, as I spoke at the Stoll Center with you as my moderator, we were taught that being from Africa was the worst possible thing, because they were uncivilized. They had no language. They had no intellect. This is what we were taught. And they reinforced it on Saturday mornings for every little Black kid with Tarzan. They were going ooga booga, yay, yay, ooga, beating on their chest like a gorilla. So this is what that systematic racism has put in. But with Prince Abdulrahman's story, there came a different story now. And even now, when I tell people I'm a real princess, I'm not a fabricated one. It's an inherited title, no different than Prince Harry or Prince William or Prince Charles. It's that same line. As a matter of fact, my dynasty goes way further and is more established than the British royal family. So we have to learn to educate ourselves and to give credit where credit is due. And if I seem as though I'm arrogant, it's not. It's just that my grandfather was in prison, enslaved, stripped of everything, and I don't have to wear his chains.
Mhm.
Therefore, don't expect my mouth to have a muzzle.
Mhm. Yeah. So you were talking about Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
It's certainly embedded in our common and everyday practices. Many Christians will know this song. Let us break bread together on our knees. Let us break
Mm-hmm.
bread together on our knees. When I fall on my knees with my face to the rising sun.
Yeah,
Where does the sun rise in?
from
It
the east.
rise in the east. Fall on my knees, face to the right.
Mm-hmm.
It's even embedded in our Christianity.
It is.
Islam.
It is. It
Islam
is.
is. So
Mm-hmm.
so 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 here we are. Here we are. Here we are. I get so excited with tell these stories. I get so excited. So Prince Ari comes here. They do then raise some. They begin to raise some money. They get Prince Sari and Baba Sari and uh, Mama Elizabeth, right?
Isabella.
Isabella. Where I get Elizabeth? Because you were talking about the
Yeah,
British
the
monarchy.
British
That's
family.
I'm gonna blame it on you anyway. Yeah, Mama Isabella. They get back to Africa. Okay, you can do the grand reveal. So
Okay.
they get back. They get
So
back
they
to.
get
They
back.
get back.
They get back to Liberia. They get
They
to
go to
Liberia.
Liberia. They get back to
Go to
Africa. They
Liberia.
they go to Liberia. Now
Right.
again, we
So
know
I
the
want to go back just a moment. I want to
okay.
take the audience back for just a second. Can you imagine being enslaved for 40 years? You
40,
finally
4
meet a
0,
40
0.
years. You finally meet a woman. You've been married to this woman now almost 40 years too, well, give or take 30. And you guys have not only children, but you have grandchildren. And they tell you you can't take anyone with you. The mother is broken. The father is broken. He's 62 years old, roughly. I got to look it up. I think he's around 62. He might have been. Yeah, he was 62, I think. He might have been a little bit older. And here he is. He see his whole legacy, and he's got to leave it. And not only does he have to leave it, he has to leave a daughter that they know that's going to have to breed, that they're going to have men that come into her quarters, because that had already happened. Some of the kids were mulatto, for the average person, black and white. And they had already been, the boys have already been stricken to forced labor. And you know this is what you're leaving behind, and you're an old broken man at this point. So now you finally told you can't bring them. You go to Liberia, and 4 months after you get there, you get yellow fever and you die. And not only that, but your slave master dies right after you in a whole different country. They both died the same year, within a couple months of each other. But your wife, she's strong. Even though she couldn't bring those kids with her, she kept fighting. She was having people write letters to her to the ACS. When the ships would come in with supplies, she had established a relationship. And she had two of her children, Levi and Simon. They end up going to Liberia through the ACS
Right.
and to take care of their mothers. So she kept fighting. So that shows you the empowerment of a woman that loves her children. She
Mm-hmm.
didn't stop. And to be honest with you, Prince Abdulrahman knew that he was fighting a losing battle. He wanted to free his sons first, not his daughters, because he knew that the daughters would bring profit to the slave master by having other children. Because what people don't understand is that in a market of supply and demand, a slave was expensive for a white slave owner. They paid $900 for Prince Abdul Rahman. So each slave, so that was a lot of money. $1,000 was a lot of money back in those days. So when you have a baby, guess what? That's free labor. You grow that baby. If that baby starts working in those fields at 5 and 6, running errands, doing things, and then if you get a girl, that's even more profit because she can have other babies, just like you breed animals. So he knew that if he tried to get the girls, it would be a lost cause, but to get the boys, he might have a chance.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was the life that when they were sitting on that ship headed back to Liberia, this is the brokenness So a lot of people say not only did he die from yellow fever, he just died from a broken heart.
Broken heart. Yeah, broken heart.
Yes.
So he passes away. They are now Mama Isabel is in Liberia. She ultimately gets two of the nine children to
Yes.
join her and their families. So they have
Yes.
family,
And their
wives,
families and their
and
children. So
children.
Simon brought over his children with him because it was Simon that had the children.
All right. So they get there. And what's fascinating about this story, you now have connected to the family of Simon and his children and their ancestry.
I
You
have.
have connected to not only the Prince's family now in Guinea, right? But also your direct family, right? So
Yes.
you are your great 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 great. So you're
Right.
seven, right? You're the
Yes, I'm
seventh
seven.
generation. You're the fifth granddaughter of Prince
Yes.
Sori,
Yes.
right? Great
Yes.
granddaughter, in fact. That's right. That's
Yes.
how they go.
And
Seven.
so
Yeah.
ironically, so in 1978, the King of Morocco came to the United States. My mother is from Natchez, Mississippi. She was born there, but she moved to California when she was 13 to Oakland. She was a very innovative lady. My mother passed on June 13th of this year, but she said, I remember her saying, Karen, the king is coming from Morocco. I think we need to go see him. And I'm like, I'm a kid, right? We catch the Greyhound bus up to DC, a 3-day journey. And we stayed with one of her friends named Miss Maddie. And then she had written the congressman in Louisiana to see if she could get an appointment with the king. And so she said she didn't hear anything for a while. And finally they said, yes, he'll be there for a short period of time. You can see him. So she said, I'm bringing my daughter. So I came in with my mom and I got a chance to meet King Hussein. I think that was his name, Hussein at the time. And I was little, and he was like, "So you're a prince?" So he knew the story. They knew the story, and they were kind of fascinated to me. Mama had me all dolled up and stuff and looking cute like a little kid. And he was the first to say, "You are Her Royal Highness Princess." And I said, "Okay." And he says, "No, don't ever forget it. Always hold your head up high and look people straight in the eye." He says, "Because you're part of our kingdom." And I never forgot it. And he gave my mother a little piece of paper with the Moroccan seal on it. And she kept it in a safe deposit box because we went through floods and fires in Louisiana, but that paper shook out. But that gave me a sense of belonging in who I was. So when I became an adult in 1983, I formed the Royal House of Sori. And I started preserving the legacy because the older people were still alive. My grandmothers were still alive. My grandmother was born, just so people know, because my father was older than my mother. My grandmother, right, who follows the line of Esther, which is Prince Sori's daughter, was born in 1890. So I could sit there on her porch and she would tell me all the stories. She knew them all because my great aunts were still alive and all of those old people were alive to tell those stories. You know how you'd be like, oh, Lord, they're telling the same story over and over again. I didn't appreciate it then, but I kept the memory of it because, it would be embedded. It would be embedded. And she was a quilter and she would tell me about how they would quilt. She told me how they would take the braiding of the hair and would hide rice in it because when the boll weavers came, it killed all the crops. It was lotus, but they call them the boll weavers, right? And food was scarce, so they knew back in slavery time to hide seeds in their hair so that they could plant them wherever they went, so they could have food to eat, right? Master would be hungry, but they had a hidden garden, and so these stories became part of my legacy and my life, and so I started wearing and owning the title to make sure that that legacy wouldn't die. Remember, Prince Abdulrahman had 9 children. 7 of them were left in the United States. Now, when my cousin in Liberia, I was fortunate enough to meet him at Center Church for a program when we viewed The Prince Among Slaves that was by Terry Alford. But his name is Dr. Ultimus Gay. and he is the direct descendant from Simon, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the remarkable thing, I have met John Quincy Adams, great 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 grandson. He met me at Center Church at a program where you attended, Dr. Selders. I've
Mm-hmm.
also met Thomas Gallaudet, great great granddaughter, Margie. She lives right over there, across the bay, and so she was there as well, and she's in Martha's Vineyard. And then I met Dr. Cox's great great granddaughter. So together, I've sent you some pictures. So
Right.
all of these people have come together in honor of. It took all of those, their ancestor and my ancestor, to have freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And they were not abolitionists; they were ACS. But some of the ACS people started becoming abolitionists. So the story unfolds like a story, a made up fallacy, or just a story, but it is actually shows you that there is a higher order of this world. Some people call it God, some people call it, what I personally call it, God. But to have all of these things come together, right, for freedom of one person. So people often ask, well, the seven that were left in Natchez, that was horrible for you all. But I say, who would tell the story if no one was left?
Mm-hmm. That's
And you
right.
have to take that legacy up, right?
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
So let's be clear. Let's
Okay.
Prince Sori, Baba Sori, and Mama Isabel had 9 children.
Yes.
Simon, and he had a wife. Her name was Hannah,
Yes.
and they went to Africa. And there
Mm-hmm.
was a Lee,
Yes.
a
Levi.
son
Levi. Mm-hmm.
that went to Africa. All right,
Yes.
Levi. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Then there was Prince. He married Bridget.
Mm-hmm.
Susan.
Mm-hmm.
That was
Yeah.
one person.
Yeah.
All right, Charles. There's another Lee or Levi. We don't. There's
Yeah.
another one. All right.
Yeah.
Kate,
Mm-hmm.
Phyllis,
Phyllis. Mm-hmm.
and your great
Esther.
grandmama Esther.
Esther.
All right, these
Mm-hmm.
are the 9 children. Now
Mm-hmm.
I need to talk about one more thing. During the visit a couple of years ago, you and your family, the elders from Timbo,
Mm-hmm.
your cousin from Liberia, and
Mm-hmm.
other kinfolk that some of them live here in Connecticut.
Mm-hmm.
It was quite a reunion where I did get to meet the great great grandson of John Quincy Adams.
Yes. He was just
And
like him. God. Yeah.
he and they look so much alike,
Yeah.
just like you can't make this up. You favor Prince Abdul
Yeah, that's what
Rahman.
I've been told. They say the nose knows.
The nose knows,
Yeah.
and we're gonna get to that in just a second.
Mm.
But this interesting connection and cross connection of histories and people's families that leads us to one of the questions I wanted to get to ask you that we ended up talking about is what wet your whistle. How did you grew up knowing these stories?
Yeah.
Now,
Mm-hmm.
I would say for many of us, we also too know some of these stories. Our families have these, if you around the old people, and I hung out with all the old people in my family, they tell you stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you didn't actually understand what they was telling you until much later. You have this remarkable family story to which you have now released a book. That's what I was trying to get to. I'm
Yes.
trying to get to the story because you now, because of your own work and some of the work that both your cousin over on the Africa side and some of the work that we've done here, with our partners at Center Church, and we have to name the Reverend Dr. Eric Hurst,
Yes.
who has led the charge in relationship to the discoveries of some of the documents that from 200 years ago, y'all, 200 years ago. This ain't just happened yesterday. This ain't happened a century. I'm sorry, a decade or two ago. Not even a century. 2 centuries ago.
Mm-hmm.
We can tell this story and tell this story pretty accurately. There are a number of different connections with the Episcopal Church, which is in fact the bishop of the Episcopal Diocese here in Connecticut. He was the third Episcopal bishop of the Diocese of Connecticut. Is also the founder of then Washington College, which we know today as Trinity College. Mm-hmm. So these founding folk of the college were also a part of the group that were involved in the founding of not only the Connecticut Colonization Society, they were also founders of the American Colonization Society. Hold on. They were also the same folk 10 years later that were involved in the Amistad, the boat, with the Cinque and all that kind of, they were, these are the same peoples. These are the same people. And they were also a part of the failed attempt to establish a black, what I would call it, HBCU here in Connecticut. That's true. There almost was a black school in the 1830s established for the education of black men in New Haven, Connecticut. That's where Yale is, for those of you who don't know. So there's this rich history of folk. The reason the reason Liberia is important because, in fact, we graduated here at Trinity College. There was a graduate of at least one. There were probably several black men that got master's degrees, and those men went to Africa as well through Liberia. And one of those men, 20 years after arriving in the late 1820s, established a school called the Fourah Bay School. Fourah Bay. That is now the Fourah Bay College is now a part of the University of Sierra Leone and is in the UNESCO historic sites. The building that was established in Sierra Leone still exists. And for a period of about 125 years, it was the school for Western education in West Africa. So those who came and got degrees in the Western context. Now, I say that only to say this, that you all, if you're African American, people would say this as a term, from here to Timbuktu. Mm-hmm. We didn't know about Timbuktu. We didn't know what that was, really. It was just the inference was that Timbuktu was far away from here. Well, we now know Timbuktu houses one of the oldest of what we would call a university. And they have documents and books. It was the site. In fact, it was a historic site for over a millennia for education. And Prince Sori was educated
in Timbuktu.
Isn't it interesting? To speak 5 languages and, in fact, to not only speak Arabic, but to write. I'll happen to be with you. This is the last little bit of notice, and we have to get you back. You got to come back because we got to talk more about this. All right. But I happened to be with you when, in fact, we believe we were looking at the script or hand of your ancestor, Prince Sori. Because he could not only speak but write, and we think we have a document that was his hand.
Yes, so they verified that that's his hand, and he actually put in the document. He has 34 documents actually where he said, "I was born in Timbuktu, but I was raised and I went with my father to Timbo to help." Because what they were doing was bringing Islam into the Futa Jalan region. And so he was educated. Not only was he educated, he was born in Timbuktu, right? And he would go back and forth. And people were like, it's so far. But remember, they were conquerors, right? And so they were already on the seas. They were already, they were conquerors. They were herders. They knew how to travel. And so there's so much on earth. So on my research and the things that I've teamed up with, because I just signed a partnership with the Greenberg Center at Trinity College and with Center Church to formalize and Dr. Selders, you were part of that development because they also saw the value in let's go and unearth some of these documents that are not known to the public. Let's try to archive, catalog these things and bring them to the public because it is time for people to really understand the significance of the intellect that was coming out of Africa. And so, yes, when my grandmother used to say, from here to Timbuktu, but guess what? Remember, there was a lot of Africans from the Mali area, from the Timbuktu area. So they would talk about home from here to Timbuktu. So that's where the term came from. They were telling us where they were from. We didn't
That's
get the message. We didn't get the memo. We didn't understand.
right. That's exactly right. Let me show your book. Look at Prince Sorry. Y'all see that nose? The nose.
The nose knows.
The nose. This is a work that I am proud of you for having developed and written. It tells our story. In most instances, our history is told by other folk. You have this incredible distinction to be able to tell your story and tell it with your own voice. Tell it because it is your family story.
Yes.
It's remarkable. It's a remarkable piece of writing. And one more thing. You not only tell, okay, Prince Sori's story is a fascinating story. But what's even more fascinating is, and you named it, there were two of Prince Sori's children that ultimately went back to Africa. 7 remained. I also had the privilege. I had my popcorn. I was looking in the corner. I say it in a funny kind of way because y'all had a little family squabble when you realized that in the telling of this story, money had continued to be raised over some time, over years after Prince Sori had passed away. Remember, he died in 1829.
Mm-hmm.
All right, just a few months after arriving back, and then they continued to raise money, and we found out some interesting things. And the question that money still were on the books into the 1830s. Mid 1830s, there still was a fund that folk put money in on the books. And so the question you asked, I thought was sincere, and it was a moment of pause for all of us. You asked the question. What was that question you asked?
I said, where's the money? What happened to the money? Because if you were still collecting the money and you didn't free the children, what happened to the money? And you can always follow the money, right? That's the best trace of anything. If you want to know what corruption's at, follow the money. So my thing was, while we were still enslaved and could have had a possibility of freedom, someone else was taking that money and using it for their own purpose, right? So it hurt because I grew up through the civil rights movement. So, I was a child, but I can remember my parents being scared and cutting off the lights when the Klan rolled by, right? And I remember, them crying about Megger and those different things, right? So for that reason, it was a painful experience to me that the elders from Timbo that were visiting didn't quite understand. Because if you've never been from a slave, or you never endured the civil rights or the Reconstruction of the South, or have the oppression where you walk down the street and you keep your eyes down not to look at white people in the eye for fear that you might have like an Emmett Till situation if you have a boy and you don't understand that. My thing was, where was the money? and what happened and why weren't we freed.
Thank you very much. Listen, we got to go.
Okay.
I have occupied you this whole time,
It was a pleasure.
and our time is up. Listen, what I want to do is have you back. I want to have you come back, and we're going to continue this story. There's some pieces of this, but let me put the book up again. Tell the folk how you can get the book and how you can be involved with your foundation and all the other things that you got going on.
So just quickly, my book is on Amazon. You can just put in The Lost Crown of Prince Abdulrahman. I know it's long, but it has significance because we were redeeming his crown. So I'm the sovereign. You can also look up, just do a quick chat GTP, a Google search on the official Royal House of Sori. It's really easy. It's www.torhos.com, and you can find me that way. But please, if you want to read the book, if you can't afford the book, if you send me an email, I'm looking for reviewers anyway. I will be glad to send you a copy, right? Up to at least 20 copies. I'm not going to go past that. So the first 20 people that actually reach out to me, I'll send you a book. But this is a story that I think resonates with everyone. It's just not my story. And this story is not really about Prince Sori, the book. It tells a little bit about him, but it tells what happened to those 7 children after he left. So thank you for
that's
having
the story.
me. Yeah.
That's the
Thank
story.
you for having me.
We gonna have to do some more work on that. Listen, you can tell I'm excited. You can tell that this is a riveting story, and I appreciate very much Princess Karen for taking the time out and sharing on this platform this fascinating story. We're gonna come back and hit it again and dig more into this story. Is an American story. It's an African American story. It is our story. And thank you again, Checker Karen, Princess Karen, for joining us. And we're going to be back at the same channel doing the same kind of stuff in the coming days. All right. Stay tuned, folks. And
bye-bye.
So then, good night.
Bye-bye. Take
Blessings
care.
to you. Peace.
Peace.